12:35 is the time. Hopeless. I tweeted useless, honestly. Back to Twitter school for me. Totally effing hopeless. This is a description that Boris Johnson has applied. It's on the record. He's kept the receipts to Matt Hancock. It is also 1 month later, as the sheer horror of the coronavirus was becoming clearer, he posited the possibility of sacking Matt Hancock. But he's still there. And I think we might turn our attention to this. Oddly, and make of this what you will, it's not great news for Keir Starmer, because he failed, I think, once again to make meaningful progress there. And once again, Ian Blackford of the SNP just sounded a little bit more in command, a little bit more effective. But I don't know, maybe that's just my ears. I'm drawn to this idea of why. And I've got some theories. But we're short of time. I keep doing this on Wednesdays. I keep forgetting that there are only 3 hours. I know, you should see the letters. Management get insisting that I do at least 6 hours a day of broadcasting, 10 hours a day. Problem is, all my colleagues are so good. Well, most of them. I don't want to necessarily inflict my interpretations upon you immediately. So if you want to have a crack at telling me, just have a go at it. Oh, and remember, don't forget that Boris is doing his best. I don't know if you saw the press conference on Monday where he read a number wrong, which I thought everyone could agree that's not really good enough. Remember when Diane Abbott got a sum wrong live on the radio that she was trying to do in her head? Boris Johnson had to read a number. Like when Priti Patel that time couldn't actually read a number off a piece of paper or an auto cue in front of them. And I saw one fellow on social media say, well, it's very difficult. I'd like to see you deal with all the stuff that he deals with, which is, I mean, partly hilarious and partly completely cultish. So there's a bit more on the coming stuff about the way he chairs meetings that's very interesting as well. Actually, I may share that with you in a moment. But before all of that, would you like to speculate upon or posit an answer to the question of why he left a man he considered to be totally effing hopeless? Keith, you better keep an eye on me on this. If I lose the self-censorship on the effing, you know what to do. Totally effing hopeless. And a month later, in the end of April 2020, wanted to replace him, but was urged perhaps not to replace him with Michael Gove because the Cabinet Office was in such a mess. So Cummings' analysis, if I've understood it correctly, and it's possible I haven't, he thought that would make a bad situation worse. You know about as much about this business as anybody else does. You don't need to be a senior political correspondent or even bigger cheese, LBC's political editor, to answer this question. Anyone can have a go at this. I don't get it. If I had sent a text to my most senior consiglieres describing Keith as totally effing hopeless, and then a month later I'd said, let's get rid of Keith, let's replace him with Calvin, which also begins with a K. So, and then a year later we had presided over 12 months of unprecedented disaster on this radio programme. Don't text me to say that we have. This is a theoretical universe in which I expressed my considered opinion that Keith is totally effing hopeless. And a month later, I posited the possibility of getting rid of him. And then we had 12 months of disaster, Ofcom complaints being upheld left, right and centre, studio falling apart, reading out emails from people like Michael Hunt, all sorts of terrible on-air disasters that are so easily avoidable. Maybe, I don't know, going in for some lockdown denial or coming out as an anti-vaxxer, just riding absolutely roughshod over all the basic tenets of journalism. And then you turned around to me at the end of that period and said, well, why didn't you get rid of Keith around about the time that you were suggesting that not only was he totally effing hopeless, but also that you should get rid of him? And I'd like you to answer that question. Again, I find myself in that weird place where I would really like to hear your answer to that question if you're still a member of the Boris Johnson fan club. If you're still in that, well, he's done his best, he's doing his best school of defence. But I don't know that you're minded to ring me yet. You will, eventually. We're all going to have to end up agreeing with the analysis I've been sharing with you for the last 4 or 5 years, because the alternative would be complete oblivion and a kind of utter abandon. I mean, even Dominic Cummings is agreeing with me now. So if you think I'm being a bit cocky or a bit overly ambitious when I say, I promise you that eventually everybody will publicly agree with my analysis of Boris Johnson, you say, oh, yeah, right, where's your proof? I said, well, the man that put him in Downing Street and enjoyed a tenure as his most senior and important advisor agrees with me. You'd have to go, yeah, but I don't. I said, well, who knows him better, you or Dominic Cummings? So why? Why didn't he get rid of him? I'd love to hear your answer to that question. Purely and simply, Boris Johnson considered Matt Hancock to be totally effing hopeless in March of 2020. A month later, he said he wanted to get rid of him. A month later, he could see no solution to some of the problems being presented other than getting rid of him. But he didn't. So, drawing upon what you know, or what you think, or what you see, or what you hear, why didn't he get rid of Matt Hancock back in March, April, or even early May of 2020? And don't forget, this is, a mischievous radio inquiry. But here is the crucial question that he would be desperate to avoid. And this is if I were advising Keir Starmer. This is where I'd have told him to go in. Or whether or not we'd have worked it out quick enough, I don't know. But here is the question. What's the death toll today? Do we know? What's the death count up to? Because Matt Hancock is still Secretary of State for Health. And I think all but the most ridiculous cultists accept that many of the tens of thousands of deaths that we've seen would have been avoided by different policies, by more effective policies, by, for example, a £37 billion test and trace system that actually worked. So here's the point. And it's not a pretty point, I'm afraid. It's not a pleasant point. Why did he leave a man he considered to be effing hopeless in charge of a pandemic response that went on to kill tens of thousands of us? See, that's not funny. That's not funny. You can use your footballing lingo or your rugger lingo if you must, Mr. Johnson. You can talk about maybe it's time to take Hancock off and put Gove on. You can be impervious to the fact that these are the lives and deaths of British people that you're playing with, literally. Why did you leave an effing hopeless Secretary of State for Health in charge of the country's response to a lethal, unprecedented, bloody pandemic?